On a Saturday morning in April, Lucas Hargrove handed over $100 at a salvage yard and towed home a car that looked like it had been dead for decades, paint stripped to bare metal, roof seams eaten through by rust, a license plate barely readable. His neighbor, Diana Caldwell, stood at her gate, coffee in hand, and laughed loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "You just taught your son the fastest way to waste money," she said. Lucas said nothing. He looked at the car and went to work. 5 days later, a racing legend arrived at that same driveway with a check for $5 million. What was hiding beneath all that rust? Stay with this story. The answer is something none of them saw coming. Lucas Hargrove was 34 years old, and he had the kind of life that didn't photograph well. He woke at 5 every morning, packed a school lunch for Wyatt, checked the handwritten schedule pinned to the refrigerator, and walked out to the converted garage behind the house where he worked as a freelance mechanic. Word of mouth kept him busy enough. It paid the bills mostly, and on the months it didn't, he didn't mention it to anyone. His wife Sarah had died 2 years earlier in a car accident on the interstate. The other driver had walked away. The medical bills she left behind had not. Lucas paid them down in chunks, quietly, without announcement, without looking for sympathy. The neighbors on Marlowe Street mostly thought of him as the quiet man with the truck and the little boy. They were not wrong, exactly. They just hadn't finished the sentence. Wyatt was 7, missing a front tooth, and devoted to a stuffed bear he carried everywhere. His mother had named the bear Bolt the night he was born because she had loved racing, loved the blur of speed and the smell of engine oil. The bear had lost one button eye and been repaired twice with mismatched thread. Wyatt did not care. Lucas almost never talked about Sarah. When Wyatt asked questions about her, he answered them fully, but he did not volunteer stories on his own. The grief had settled in him the way sediment settles in still water, invisible on the surface, permanent underneath. Elijah Cross was Lucas's only real friend on the block. He was 40 years old, ran a small repair shop at the end of Marlowe Street, and had the useful quality of knowing when to talk and when to sit in silence with a cup of coffee. On Friday evenings, he sometimes brought sandwiches over, and the two of them would eat in the garage while Wyatt did his homework at the workbench. He was the only adult in Wyatt's life that the boy called by his first name instead of sir or uncle. Diana Caldwell had moved to the street 18 months earlier. Her house had a black front door, a white Audi parked at a precise angle, and window boxes filled with flowers that never seemed to wilt. She was 31, worked as a real estate broker, and operated by a set of standards she had never consciously written down, but enforced with absolute consistency. She was not a cruel person. She simply had no habit of pausing before she spoke. She and Lucas had exchanged perhaps 40 words in 18 months. She had once suggested, with a smile that technically qualified as friendly, that he might consider finding a neighborhood that's a better fit. He had looked at her for a moment and then gone back inside. She interpreted this as rudeness. He interpreted it as the only reasonable response. Marlowe Street was the kind of block where information traveled faster than it had any right to. Houses sat close together. Windows faced windows. People walked their dogs slowly and made eye contact. Whatever happened in one driveway was general knowledge by the following morning. Carter Voss had operated Voss Auto Salvage for over 30 years on the eastern edge of town, in a lot surrounded by chain-link fence and the faint smell of transmission fluid. He was 60, practical to the point of bluntness, and priced his inventory by intuition rather than research. On the morning Lucas arrived to pick up a carburetor for a regular customer, Carter was in the middle of liquidating a large collection of vehicles that had come out of a private storage facility whose lease had expired. The estate executor wanted the lot cleared by Monday. Carter wanted the money. Neither of them cared much about provenance. Lucas was walking along the back row when he saw it. It sat in the far corner of the lot, half shaded by a rusted corrugated roof that had been leaning for years and never fell. The body was a 2-door coupe, black or what had once been black, before weather and time had reduced the paint to a patchwork of bare metal and peeling finish. But there was something in the proportions that stopped him. The wheelbase was longer than it should have been for something that size. The angle of the windshield was steeper than any production car from that era. The wheel arches were shaped by hand. He could tell that without touching it, just from the way the curve met the body line. Someone had thought about this car for a very long time before building it. He put his hand on the rear quarter panel before he made any conscious decision to do so. The metal was cold. Under his palm, through the rust and the grime, he could feel the bodywork not stamped, not pressed by machine, but shaped and finished by hand. It was slight, the difference, but to a man who had been touching cars his entire life, it was unmistakable. Carter walked up behind him. "That one's $100. Take it today, or it goes in the crusher Monday morning." Lucas stood still for a long moment. He thought about Wyatt's shoes, which were a size too small and had been for 6 weeks because the timing was never right. He thought about the electricity bill sitting on the kitchen counter. He thought about the fact that he could not have explained, under any reasonable questioning, why he was standing here with his hand on a rusted car he knew nothing about. He paid the $100. When he opened the driver's door to check the interior before towing, a small piece of a sticker peeled away from the bottom edge of the doorframe and drifted to the ground. He picked it up and put it in his pocket without looking at it closely. He would look at it later. He didn't know why that mattered, but it did. The tow home was slow and slightly absurd. Elijah's pickup, the rope, the rusted coupe drifting behind at 15 miles an hour, with its dead steering making it wander slightly in the lane. They pulled onto Marlowe Street at 9:40 in the morning, and by the time they reached Lucas's driveway, there were at least 6 people watching from various distances. The woman across the street lingered behind her curtain. 2 kids on bicycles came to a full stop. A man walking a retriever paused at the corner and did not resume walking. Diana was at her gate. Lucas had not seen her there when he turned onto the block, but she had been there for a few minutes already, as though she had known the right time to be outside. He heard her clearly. He heard the neighbor laugh, just briefly, before catching herself. He heard the words "poor kid," and he felt them land, not on him but near Wyatt, who was standing at the edge of the driveway with his backpack still on from the morning, having come outside when he heard the truck. Lucas did not turn around. He put the truck in park, got out, and said to his son, "Go inside and get my tool bag." Wyatt looked at Diana once. Not with anger, with something more careful than that. Then he looked at the car, the same way his father had looked at it in the salvage yard, with his head slightly tilted as though he was listening for something. Then he turned and went inside. Lucas began unhooking the tow rope. He did not rush. He did not perform composure. He simply was composed, in the way of someone who had already processed pain far larger than the opinion of a neighbor and come out the other side still standing. That night, after Wyatt was asleep, Lucas went to work. He set up 2 work lights in the garage, put on the small radio he kept on the shelf between the wrenches and the socket sets, and began cleaning the car methodically, the way he did everything from the bottom up, from the back forward, slowly enough to see what he was dealing with. He used a solvent cloth on the floor of the driver's footwell, and the grime came away in sheets. Underneath, stenciled into the bare metal of the floor pan, was a chassis number. He looked at it for a long time. It was not a standard format. It did not match any VIN structure he had ever seen. The prefix was a 7-character string, beginning with the letters R, A, and C, followed by 2 digits and 2 more letters. He photographed it with his phone. He ran searches for 40 minutes and came up with nothing definitive. He found a reference to a European racing registry that used similar prefix conventions in the early 1970s, but the specific string matched nothing in any public database he could find. He sent Elijah a message. "You ever seen a chassis prefix starting with rack, 67? Elijah replied 11 minutes later, "Nope. Go to sleep." Lucas did not go to sleep. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out the sticker fragment he had picked up in the salvage yard. He held it under the work light. Most of it was gone. The adhesive had dried to nothing over the decades, and the paper had dissolved at the edges. What remained was a portion of a logo, a stylized wheel, and, beside it, what appeared to be a simplified flame rendered in a bold graphic style. He did not recognize it immediately, but something about the design, its precision, its confidence told him it had not been made to decorate a streetcar. He taped the fragment carefully to a clean piece of paper and went inside. The next morning, Elijah came over early, before the coffee had finished brewing, because Lucas had called at 6:45 and said only, "Come take a look at something." Elijah stood under the car on a rolling creeper for 5 full minutes without speaking. When he came out, He sat up slowly and looked at Lucas with an expression that existed somewhere between professional concern and badly suppressed excitement. "The frame has been hand-reinforced," he said. "Not factory. Someone welded additional gusseting on every junction point. That's not a weekend project. That's months of work by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." He stood and walked to the front of the car, opened what remained of the hood, and leaned in. "Lucas, this is not a stock block. This has been machined, bored out and machined by hand." He straightened up. Whoever built this car was building it for something specific, and they had serious money and serious knowledge. Lucas had already taken photographs of the suspension components. The geometry was wrong for a street car, specifically wrong in the way that indicated custom track day tuning. The springs, where he could see them, were not standard catalog parts. They had been fabricated. That afternoon, he found a specialized forum for vintage racing vehicles, an old, text-heavy site with few photographs and members who had been using the same usernames since the early days of the internet. He created an account, uploaded the photographs of the chassis number, the suspension geometry, the body curves, and the sticker fragment, and wrote a careful, factual description of what he had found. He asked if anyone recognized any element of the car. By the following morning, there were 47 replies. This was, by the standards of the forum, extraordinary, the forum members argued. Several were certain it was a well-executed kit build from the 1980s, someone's ambitious project assembled from racing catalogs and salvaged parts. 3 members, who identified themselves as having professional backgrounds in motorsport history, were less certain. One of them, posting under the name GarageLegend_TX, wrote, "If that chassis number is authentic, you are looking at something that has been on a missing persons list in this community for 15 years. Another member sent a private message. "Stop posting public photographs. Trust me on this." Lucas printed the thread and put it in a folder. That evening, Wyatt came into the garage after school and sat on an overturned plastic bucket, which was his customary seat for the times he watched his father work. He had Bolt the bear in his lap. He watched his father polish the rear panel for a while and then said, "Does the car have a name yet?" Lucas thought about it. "Not yet. You want to pick one?" Wyatt looked at the car seriously. He looked at it the way Lucas had looked at it in the salvage yard, with his head tilted, as though the answer was in the shape of it rather than in any word. After a moment, he said, "Bolt." Lucas set down the polishing cloth. He was very still for a moment. He said, "That's a good name," and went back to work. On the 4th day, Lucas was working on the B-pillar on the passenger side when he noticed the paint was thicker there than elsewhere. He used fine grit paper to carefully cut through the black and found, underneath, a layer of white blue, a very specific shade, slightly metallic, unlike anything in current production. He knew the color, distantly, the way you know a song from a decade you didn't live through. He had seen it in photographs. He worked more carefully now, treating the surface the way an archaeologist treats a dig site, removing material in thin passes and examining what he found. And then, on the inner face of the pillar, hidden from view when the door was closed, he found it, a stamped mark pressed directly into the metal, not a sticker, not a plate, a physical impression hammered into the steel itself, a number, and beside the number, a stylized signature rendered in 3 connected letters. He photographed it. He searched for 3 hours. At 2 in the morning, he found a match in a digitized archive of an automotive trade magazine from 1983. The article was about the dissolution of a racing team that had operated out of the American Southwest during the 1970s and early 80s. The team had been among the most technically innovative in endurance racing during that period. The article mentioned, in passing, that several prototype vehicles developed by the team had been destroyed in a warehouse fire in the autumn of 1983. Among those vehicles, according to a brief paragraph near the end of the article, was a single development prototype, a testbed for a revolutionary chassis geometry that had never been raced officially, but whose design principles had, according to the article's author, quietly influenced the architecture of competitive endurance vehicles throughout the following decade. The prototype had been presumed destroyed. It had never been seen again. The stamped signature on the B-pillar belonged to a man named Marcus Webb. The article identified him as the lead engineer of that racing team. It also identified him, in a single sentence, as having died in a testing accident in 1982, 1 year before the fire that was supposed to have taken the car with it. The team had been owned and operated by a man named Dominic Ashford. Lucas sat in the garage until daylight came through the gap under the door. Elijah had not meant to tell anyone. He told his wife, because he could not contain it any longer. 48 hours of knowing something this large, and being asked to say nothing was more than a reasonable person should bear. His wife told the woman 2 houses down, because it seemed wrong to carry it alone. The woman 2 houses down told her husband and also the man who walked the retriever at the corner. By the following morning, Marlowe Street had achieved the particular state of suppressed collective awareness in which everyone knows the same thing and no one is saying it directly. 2 neighbors appeared at Lucas's garage door with implausible pretexts. One wanted to borrow a tire gauge, one was checking whether he had seen a lost cat. Both of them looked past him at the car for as long as they could before he said thank you and moved to close the door. He covered the car with a blue tarpaulin after the second visit. Diana heard the story in a version that had been translated through 4 people, which meant it had acquired some rounding of the corners but preserved the essential shape. The version she heard said that the car Lucas had brought home for $100 might be worth millions. She laughed when she heard it. She said it sounded like something from a television program. Then she went inside and opened her laptop. She searched Dominic Ashford. She read for 20 minutes. She found photographs of a man in his late 50s, lean and white-haired, standing in front of a collection of vehicles at an auction house, and beside that, a profile piece in a financial publication that put his net worth at somewhere north of $1 billion, built from a combination of racing winnings, early investments in automotive technology companies, and a collection of historic vehicles whose value had appreciated considerably over 40 years. There was a note at the bottom of the profile, barely a footnote, that mentioned he had been quietly searching, for over a decade, for a prototype vehicle from his early career that was believed lost in a fire. Diana closed the laptop and stood at her kitchen window, looking at the blue tarpaulin in Lucas's driveway for a long time. She knocked on his door that afternoon, holding a measuring cup, explaining that she needed to borrow a kitchen appliance. Lucas opened the door, listened, and said, "I don't have one." He closed the door. Not rudely, simply with the finality of a man who had already decided how much energy to spend on this particular exchange. She stood on the step for a moment, then walked back to her own house. On the evening of the 4th day, an email arrived in the inbox connected to Lucas's forum account. The sender's name was Giselle Hartman. Her title, listed in the signature line, was Executive Assistant, Office of Dominic Ashford. The message was short. It said that her employer had become aware of the forum discussion and the photographs that had been shared there. It said that if Mr. Hargrove was in possession of the vehicle he had described, Mr. Ashford would very much like to meet with him in person. It said that a meeting could be arranged within 24 hours at Mr. Hargrove's convenience. It asked him to confirm. Lucas read the email 3 times, sitting at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface. Then he stood, went back to the garage, sat down on Wyatt's overturned bucket, and called Elijah. "Are you awake? It's 9:30. I got a message from Dominic Ashford's office." There was a pause. "Say that again, slowly." Lucas repeated it. Another pause. Longer. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." He looked at the blue tarpaulin. "I wanted to tell someone first." "You told the right person," Elijah said. "Now tell Giselle Hartman you'll see them tomorrow." The 5th morning was a Saturday again, which felt like either coincidence or symmetry, depending on how you looked at it. Lucas woke at 5, made coffee, packed Wyatt's breakfast even though it was a weekend and there was no school, because the routine was the architecture of their days, and he didn't take it apart without reason. He put on the best flannel shirt he owned, which was dark green and had no visible stains. He was aware, briefly, of how this decision looked from the outside. He did not change his mind. He wore the shirt. Wyatt asked over breakfast, "Is someone special coming today?" Lucas said, "Maybe." Wyatt said, "Is Bolt going to stay?" Lucas looked at his son for a moment. He said, "Let's see what the day brings." Elijah arrived at 9 without being invited, because he understood that some things require a witness. He brought 2 cups of coffee in a carrier and had the expression of a man who has placed a bet and is trying not to show it. The black Cadillac pulled to the curb in front of the house at precisely 10 o'clock. Lucas was standing in the driveway when it parked. From down the block, behind the glass of her front window, Diana Caldwell watched the car arrive. She had been watching for 20 minutes by then, her coffee going cold in her hand. Dominic Ashford did not look like a man who was accustomed to being surprised. He was 58 years old, lean in the way of people who have always been physical, with white hair cut close and hands that showed decades of work. He moved without ceremony, climbing out of the passenger side and walking directly toward the garage with the purpose of someone who already knows where they need to be. He stopped when he saw the car. Giselle Hartman came in behind him, tablet in hand, and stood to the side. Elijah was near the garage door, not quite inside, occupying the particular position of someone who is present without being part of the meeting. Dominic walked around the car. He did it slowly, the way Lucas had done it in the salvage yard, both hands sometimes extended, occasionally touching the surface. He said nothing for a long time. Lucas watched him and did not speak. Finally, Dominic stood at the rear of the car and was still for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and level. "I thought it was gone forever." Lucas said, "You know this car?" Dominic turned and looked at him for the first time directly. "I built it. 1971. It took nearly 2 years, and it cost me more than money." He turned back to the car. "In 1983, I was told it burned in the warehouse fire, along with everything else." He paused. "I believed it because I needed to believe something." He walked to the passenger side and crouched to look at the B-pillar. He was silent for a long moment. Then he pressed one finger to the stamped signature in the metal. He stayed like that for what felt like a full minute, one finger on the steel, not moving, not speaking. "Marcus Webb was my chief engineer," he said at last. "He died in a testing accident in the spring of 1982. He never saw this car race. It never raced at all. It was a development prototype. We built it to prove a geometry theory that Marcus had worked on for 4 years. The design was right. It changed the way endurance chassis were built for the next 15 years. He stood. Marcus put his mark on every structure he built by hand. He said, an engineer should sign their work the same way an artist signs a painting. Lucas said, "What happened to the car after the fire? If it didn't burn?" Dominic shook his head slowly. "I don't know. Someone must have moved it before the fire, or it wasn't in the warehouse that night. I had people look for it, twice, in the years after. Eventually, I stopped." He looked at Lucas. "How did you find it?" Lucas told him. He did not edit the story or make it more dramatic than it was. He said he had come to the salvage yard for a carburetor. He said the car had been in a back row, scheduled for the crusher. He said he had noticed the proportions and that something in the shape of it had made him stop. Dominic listened without interrupting. When Lucas finished, he asked, "Why did you buy it? It looked like nothing from the outside." Lucas thought about this. He took his time. "I can't fully explain it. There was something in the lines of it, the way it was shaped. It didn't look like something that happened by accident. It looked like something someone thought about for a long time." Dominic looked at him steadily. Marcus used almost exactly those words. "The first time he showed me the initial drawings, the garage was quiet for a moment. A specific kind of quiet that has weight to it, the kind that follows when something true has been said and recognized." Wyatt appeared at the garage door. He had Bolt the bear under one arm and was holding onto the door frame with the other hand, not coming in, just looking. Lucas turned and said, "Come here." Wyatt came in carefully and stood next to his father. Dominic looked at the boy. Wyatt looked at the old man, then at the car, then back at the man. He said, Dad named it Bolt." Dominic's expression changed in a way that was small but visible to anyone paying attention. He looked at the car, at the name, and something moved through his face. He looked back at the boy and said, "That's a good name." Wyatt considered this seriously. Then he said, "Did you miss it a lot, the car?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. "Very much. That's what my dad says about things that are important," Wyatt said. "That you miss them." Giselle stepped forward quietly and held the tablet toward Lucas. On the screen was a number, $5 million. Below it was a brief outline of a purchase agreement. 1 page, straightforward. Dominic said, I don't negotiate this kind of thing. That's the value to a museum and to me. You can say no. You don't have to answer today." Lucas looked at the number. He looked at his son. He looked at the car one more time, at the shape of it, at the curve of the rear quarter panel, at the cold metal under the work lights. He did not answer immediately. That evening, after Dominic and Giselle had gone, Lucas sat in the garage for a long time without doing anything. Wyatt was inside, watching television. Elijah had stayed for an hour, and then gone home with the good sense not to push for a conversation that hadn't started. Lucas thought about Sarah. She had kept a sketchbook full of drawings, cars mostly. Not technical drawings, but impression sketches, the way a person draws something they love. There was one drawing she had done over and over in slightly different versions, a long, low coupe with a steep windshield and rear wheel arches that looked carved rather than stamped. He had looked at that drawing 100 times without knowing what car she had been drawing from memory. He understood now that she might not have been drawing from memory at all. She might have been drawing from imagination, imagining something she had only ever read about. He thought about the name Wyatt had chosen without knowing any of this. He thought about the bear and the car and the same name landing on both through a 7-year-old's instinct in a garage on Marlowe Street. He picked up his phone and called Giselle Hartman. "I have a condition," he said. "One condition, and then, yes." She said, "Tell me." "The car gets displayed publicly, not in a private collection. It goes somewhere people can see it." He paused. "And on the information placard, there's a line that says it was restored and identified by someone who could see the value when others only saw the rust. You don't have to use my name, but Marcus Webb's name gets on there clearly, and the engineering gets explained in a way that a regular person can understand what he built." Giselle said, "I'll relay this to Mr. Ashford immediately." Lucas waited. 8 minutes later, she called back. "He agrees to all of it, and he wants to add something. He wants the boy's name on the placard as well. He said the car has a name now, and the person who gave it that name should be recorded." Lucas put his hand over his eyes for a moment. He sat like that in the quiet garage for a while. Then he said, "Tell him thank you." The following morning, Diana Caldwell came outside without a coffee cup. Lucas noticed this when he saw her from the kitchen window. It was the first time in 18 months he could remember her outside, without something in her hands, some prop of casual normalcy. She stood at her gate as the flatbed transport vehicle backed carefully into the street. Lucas came out to supervise the loading. He watched 2 technicians from a vehicle restoration service attach the support harness to the undercarriage with a care that was close to reverence. Diana walked across the street. She stopped a few feet from him. She started to speak. "I didn't know. I couldn't have." Lucas looked at her. There was no victory in his expression, no satisfaction, nothing performed. He said, "It's all right, Diana. Next time you see someone buy something they believe in, maybe wait 5 days before you weigh in." She had no answer for that. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. Lucas turned back to the car. He heard her walk away behind him. Wyatt came out the front door and stood on the porch, still in his pajamas, holding Bolt the bear. He watched the car being loaded onto the flatbed. He raised one hand and gave a small, solemn wave. Lucas saw it from the corner of his eye. He said nothing, but his throat tightened in a way he had not expected. The money arrived in Lucas's account 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, in a single transfer. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the number on the screen of his laptop for a long time without moving. The first thing he did was call the hospital billing office and pay the remaining balance on Sarah's medical debt, the full amount, in one payment, in a conversation that lasted 4 minutes and ended with Lucas saying, "Thank you," and hanging up before the administrator could say anything more. He sat quietly for a moment after that. It was the first time since the accident that the financial weight of losing her had been fully lifted, and the feeling was not triumph. It was more like the way a room feels after a window has been opened in winter, suddenly lighter, suddenly different in temperature, the air moving again. He bought Wyatt new shoes, the right size, in a style Wyatt had pointed at in a store window 6 months earlier, without asking for them. He bought the building blocks set that depicted a detailed replica of a classic endurance racing vehicle. He said, when he gave it to Wyatt, "I thought you might like to build one yourself." Wyatt looked at the box for a long moment. Then he looked up at his father. "Can we build it together?" Lucas said, "Yeah, this weekend." He called Elijah and told him he was putting money into the shop, not as a formal investment with paperwork, but as a contribution between two people who trusted each other. Elijah argued briefly, as a matter of principle, and then accepted, which was also a matter of principle. They agreed to expand the garage, add a second lift, and take on an apprentice. The rest went into a fund at Wyatt's school. Lucas named it for Sarah. It was structured simply assistance for children whose families were carrying the kind of weight that doesn't show in a school photograph. He did not attend a ceremony when it was established. He sent a letter, signed his name, and declined the invitation to speak. 3 weeks after the money arrived, Giselle Hartman called to invite Lucas and Wyatt to the opening of the new exhibition at the Transport Museum in the city, a gallery dedicated to the engineering history of American endurance racing. The centerpiece of the gallery was the car, fully restored to what it had looked like in the autumn of 1971, in the white-blue paint that a man named Marcus Webb had chosen because, according to a note in his own handwriting found in an archive, he felt white-blue was the color of things moving faster than they should be allowed to move. Lucas drove them there on a Thursday evening. Wyatt wore his good shoes, the new ones, and carried Bolt the bear in the crook of his arm. Dominic was already inside when they arrived. He shook Lucas's hand first, then crouched down to be level with Wyatt. The car was in the center of the gallery under carefully calibrated lighting, suspended slightly on a low platform, with the full length of it visible from every angle. It was extraordinary. It looked like what it was, a thing imagined before its time, hidden for 40 years, returned to the light. The information placard was mounted on the wall beside it. Lucas read it slowly. Marcus Webb's name was prominent. The engineering was described in plain language that told the story honestly, the geometry, the years of work, the influence that had traveled forward through time without anyone knowing its source. Near the bottom was a sentence about the car's recovery, that it had been found in a salvage yard by a man who recognized something in its proportions that others had missed. And below that, in smaller text, a second line. The car was named Bolt by a 7-year-old boy named Wyatt Hargrove, who said it was the right name, and it was. Wyatt stood in front of the car for a long time. He was very still. Then he said, without turning around, "Dad, is Bolt happy here?" Lucas stood behind him, looking at the car. He thought about Marcus Webb spending 2 years building something he believed in. He thought about 40 years in a salvage yard. He thought about a 7-year-old boy in a Saturday morning garage, putting his hand on the door and listening for something. "I think so," Lucas said. "More people can see him now." Wyatt nodded. "That's good." He reached up and took his father's hand. "Can we get food after? I want the kind with the dipping sauce." Lucas smiled. It was a full, unguarded smile, the kind that comes up before you've decided to allow it, and several people in the gallery noticed it without quite knowing why it seemed worth noticing. "Yeah," he said. "Whatever you want." On Marlowe Street, Diana Caldwell's house had a "for rent" sign in the yard by the end of the following month. The official reason, according to what she told the neighbors she still spoke to, was that a new office location made the commute inconvenient. This was true, as far as it went. Nobody on the block said anything unkind about it. The particular justice that real life occasionally delivers is not loud or dramatic. It is simply the weight of a moment you cannot undo, sitting with you on quiet evenings, in the exact shape of the words you chose to say out loud, in front of people who were listening. Lucas kept the garage. He kept the radio on the shelf between the wrenches and the socket sets. He kept the 5 o'clock mornings and the handwritten schedule on the refrigerator, and the Friday evenings with Elijah and the sandwiches and the coffee. He did not become a different person. He became a more settled version of the person he had already been, someone who knew, with certainty now, that the things worth attending to rarely announce themselves, and that the difference between value and worthlessness is often nothing more than the willingness to stop and look properly at something the rest of the world has walked past. He still talked to Sarah, sometimes, in the garage at night, not out loud, but in the way that people who have loved someone truly continue the conversation long after the other voice has gone quiet, not from grief, but from the understanding that some things don't conclude, they simply change form. He thought, in those quiet nights, that she would have known the car for what it was. She would have recognized it at the back of the salvage yard and walked straight to it without hesitation. She would have put her hand on the rear quarter panel and said, simply, "I know this shape." He thought she would have been proud of Wyatt for the name. He thought she would have been proud of him for the $100.